She slid a note under the Vampire King's plate that read, "Don't drink the wine." His hand stilled over the crystal stem, but the server who delivered his order was already dead in the walk-in freezer, and the woman who'd just saved him had 40 seconds before the kitchen timer exposed them both. Maya Reeves balanced 3 plates on her left arm and carried the wine glass in her right hand, moving through the Vermilion Room's main dining hall with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked third shift for 4 years straight. The crimson velvet booths absorbed sound like they were designed to keep secrets, and the Art Deco chandeliers overhead cast everything in amber light that made the white tablecloths glow like stages waiting for something to happen. She had delivered 1,000 wine glasses to 1,000 tables and never thought twice about any of them until tonight. Until this one, until the crystal stem caught the light wrong and she saw the shimmer. The liquid distorted the reflection of the chandelier above it in a way that made her stomach drop, made her hands go cold, made her see her sister Caroline choking at a state dinner 3 years ago, while security held Maya back in the gallery, and everyone pretended it was an allergic reaction, even though Caroline never had allergies in her life. The shimmer was the same, that telltale iridescence that came from something dissolved in wine that should not be there, something meant to look like sediment or a trick of expensive vintage, but was actually poison moving through liquid, like oil through water. Maya set the glass down on table 12 in front of the Vampire King Dominic Thorne without letting her hand shake, and while he was looking at the menu, she pulled a napkin from her apron, wrote 4 words with the pen she kept for taking orders, and slid it under the edge of his plate. "Don't drink the wine." She stepped back and turned toward the kitchen, but her eyes tracked him in the reflection of the porthole window, watched him reach for the glass, watched his hand stop halfway, watched his fingers hover over the crystal stem while his security detail went very still, in the way that meant weapons were about to appear. The Vampire King did not move. He sat in the center of the booth with his coat still on even though the restaurant was warm, and he looked at the napkin, and then he looked at Maya. His eyes were dark enough to be black in the amber light, and he watched her hands, not her face, like he was calculating whether she was the threat or the warning. Maya felt her heartbeat in her throat, but kept her expression neutral, the same pleasant server mask she wore for every table, even though her mind was racing through the implications of what she had just done. You did not interfere with the Vampire King. You did not pass him notes. You did not acknowledge that you knew what he was, because the Vermilion Room catered to the kind of elite who pretended the world worked a certain way, and the staff pretended along with them. But Maya had seen her sister die, and she had spent 3 years trying to understand why. And she knew what poisoned wine looked like, even if she did not know who had poisoned it or why. The kitchen door swung open and Jenna stumbled out, her face the color of old paper, her eyes too wide. She grabbed Maya's wrist hard enough to hurt and pulled her toward the server station near the bar, away from the tables, away from the guests. "Brett's in the freezer," Jenna whispered, and her voice cracked on his name. His throat, Maya, his throat. Maya went cold. Brett had been the one to bring the wine up from the cellar, the one who decanted it, the one who was supposed to deliver it to table 12 before Maya took it from him because he said he needed to check on the soufflés in the back. The kitchen timer showed 38 seconds in red digital numbers, counting down the way it always did, the way it had been counting all night. When it hit 0, the shift manager would go to the freezer to pull the prepared dessert plates, and he would find Brett's body, and everything would explode into police and questions and cameras, and Maya would be standing there with a napkin note under the Vampire King's plate. She looked back at table 12. Dominic Thorne had not touched the wine. His security was watching Maya now, 3 men in dark suits who had positioned themselves at angles that covered every exit, and she understood with perfect clarity that she had just made herself part of something that was much bigger than a poisoned glass and a dead coworker. The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, and his voice carried across the dining room, even though he did not raise it, quiet and precise like a surgeon making an incision. "Who sent you?" It was not a question. Maya walked back to his table because standing still would look like guilt and running would look like panic. And she had learned from Caroline that the only way to survive powerful people was to meet them at eye level and tell them something true. Nobody, she said, and kept her hands visible, kept her voice steady. But somebody sent that wine, and they killed the wrong server. The dining room had gone quiet in the way that happens when predators stop pretending to be civilized, when the careful performance of normalcy cracks, and everyone can see the shapes moving underneath. The other guests were watching now, the kind of people who wore clothes that cost more than Maya made in 6 months. The kind of people who came to the Vermilion Room because it was neutral ground where vampires and humans and other things could meet without breaking the fragile treaties that kept the city from tearing itself apart. Dominic's hand was still near the wine glass, but he had not picked it up, and Maya saw him look at the liquid, saw him notice the shimmer she had noticed, saw the recognition move across his face like a shadow. 26 seconds on the timer. Jenna was crying silently near the server station, and another server was asking her what was wrong, and the noise was going to draw attention, going to pull the manager out of his office, going to start the avalanche of consequences. The Vampire King's security detail moved closer, and one of them put his hand on Maya's shoulder, not rough but not gentle either, steering her toward the private hallway that led to the wine cellar and the storage rooms, and the places where guests were not supposed to go. She did not resist because resisting would be stupid, and because part of her, the part that had watched her sister die and spent 3 years knowing that someone had murdered Caroline and gotten away with it, wanted to know what happened next. Dominic stood, left the wine glass untouched on the table, and followed his security and Maya into the hallway. The door closed behind them, and the sound of the dining room cut off like someone had thrown a switch, leaving only the hum of the refrigeration units and the distant clatter of the kitchen and the timer counting down somewhere behind the walls. 15 seconds. Dominic looked at Maya and she looked back, and for one long moment neither of them spoke, and then he said the thing that changed everything. "You have seen this before." Not a question, a statement, because he was reading her the way she had learned to read tables, the way you could tell who was dangerous and who was prey, and who was pretending to be something they were not. "Yes," Maya said, and her voice came out steady even though her hands wanted to shake. "My sister. 3 years ago. Diplomatic dinner. They said it was natural causes, but I saw the wine, and it looked like this and nobody believed me." Dominic's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, some calculation recalibrating. The timer hit 0. Somewhere in the kitchen a bell chimed bright and cheerful, the sound of soufflés ready to serve, the sound of a shift manager about to walk into a freezer and find a body. The security man still had his hand on Maya's shoulder, and she felt his grip tighten, felt the moment stretch and bend, felt the weight of her sister's death, and Brett's death, and the poisoned wine that was still sitting on table 12 like a loaded gun. Dominic pulled out his phone and typed something fast, and 30 seconds later the kitchen erupted in noise, someone shouting, someone screaming, the crash of something metal hitting the floor. The Vampire King looked at Maya, and she looked at him, and they both knew that the clock had just run out, that whatever was about to happen next would determine whether she walked out of this hallway or disappeared the way her sister had disappeared into a closed casket and a file marked accidental death. "Tell me everything," Dominic said, and Maya took a breath and started talking. The wine cellar beneath the Vermilion Room smelled like old stone and fermentation, centuries of bottles aging in iron racks that climbed toward a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Dominic's security chief Victor had pulled Maya down the narrow stairs with professional efficiency, one hand on her elbow, the other near the weapon she could see outlined under his jacket. And now she stood in a space lit only by candles because apparently vampires actually did prefer that aesthetic, or maybe they just liked watching humans try not to panic in the flickering dark. Dominic descended last, closing the door at the top of the stairs, and the sound of the kitchen chaos cut off completely, leaving only the drip of condensation somewhere in the darkness, and the sound of Maya's own breathing too loud in her ears. 19 minutes, Victor said, checking his watch. Before the manager finds the body and calls the police. Before this gets complicated. Maya wanted to laugh at the idea that this was not already complicated, but she kept her mouth shut and watched Dominic move through the cellar like he owned it, which he probably did, which he probably owned half the city if the rumors about vampire kings were true. He stopped in front of a mirror she had not noticed before, tall and ornate, framed in tarnished silver that looked older than the building, older than the city maybe. The kind of thing that belonged in a museum, or a castle, or somewhere that kept track of centuries instead of years. The right of glass, Dominic said, and his voice carried weight, like he was invoking something official, something binding. It hasn't been used in 60 years. If you lie, the mirror will show me your worst moment. If you tell truth, it will show me why you act. Maya looked at the mirror and saw herself reflected in candlelight, pale and underfed and wearing a server's uniform with a wine stain on the sleeve from earlier in the shift when a customer had grabbed her arm. She looked like exactly what she was, a third-shift waitress who made barely enough to cover rent, who had not slept more than 5 hours a night since her sister died, who had just saved a vampire king's life and did not know if that made her brave or stupid. Stand in front of the glass, Dominic said, and Maya stepped forward because what else was she going to do? Because running would prove she was guilty, and staying still would prove she was scared, and the only option left was to walk into whatever this was and hope she walked back out. The mirror's surface rippled like water even though it was clearly solid, clearly glass, and Maya felt her skin go cold. 3 questions, Dominic said, positioning himself beside her so they were both reflected, so she could see his face and hers and the candles burning in the background like some kind of ritual setup. Did you poison the wine? No, Maya said, and the word came out steady. The mirror showed her reflection unchanged, no distortion, just her own face looking back. Victor was watching from the shadows, his hand definitely on his weapon now, ready to end this if the glass showed something different. Do you know who did? Dominic asked, and Maya shook her head. No, she said again. I saw it was poisoned, but I don't know who. I don't know why. The mirror rippled again, and for a second Maya thought she saw something else in the reflection, a flicker of movement, but it settled back to just her face, still clear, still true. Dominic paused before the third question, and Maya knew this was the one that mattered, the one that would determine whether she left this cellar or stayed here in a different way, permanently. Why did you warn me? He asked, and his voice was quieter now, almost curious. Maya looked at her reflection and felt 3 years of grief and rage and helplessness rise up in her throat. Because my sister died from poisoned wine at a diplomatic dinner 3 years ago, she said, and her voice shook but did not break. Because I watched her choke while security held me back, and everyone said it was natural causes, even though I saw the shimmer in her glass the same way I saw it in yours. Because I couldn't save her, but I could save you, and I couldn't just stand there and let it happen again. The mirror's surface went dark. Maya's reflection disappeared, and in its place came an image that hit her like a fist to the chest. Caroline in an emerald dress at a charity gala, laughing at something someone had said, raising a wine glass to her lips. Maya watched her sister drink, watched her face change, watched the confusion turn to panic, turn to terror as her throat closed and she clawed at her neck and fell. Maya was there in the reflection too, younger, screaming from the gallery above, held back by 2 security guards while Caroline convulsed on the floor, and guests stepped back to give her room to die. The image held for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, and then snapped back to Maya's reflection, her face wet with tears. She had not felt herself cry. She was 26, Maya said, and her voice came out raw. You people killed her at a charity gala. Dominic was very still beside her. "Not my people," he said finally. "But yes, our world. And it will kill you too, unless you let me make this right." The mirror faded back to normal glass, just a reflection, just a surface. But Maya could still see Caroline falling every time she blinked. Victor stepped forward, and for a second, Maya thought he was going to shoot her anyway, truth or not, because she knew too much, and she was too angry, and anger made people dangerous. But Dominic held up one hand, and Victor stopped. "She's clean," Dominic said. "She didn't poison the wine. She's a witness, not an assassin." His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, read the message, and his expression went cold in a way that made Maya understand why people were afraid of vampire kings. "The council wants confirmation I drank the wine," he said. "Someone on the council wants me dead. If I don't appear weakened at the summit in 4 hours, they'll know I was warned." Maya's mind clicked through the implications faster than she expected, 3 years of obsessing over her sister's death having taught her how to think like someone planning a murder. "The timer," she said. "It wasn't about finding Brett's body. It was about forcing you to drink before you suspected anything. The body was discovered right when you would have started feeling the poison, right when you would have been too weak to get help." Dominic looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Exactly," he said, "which means whoever did this knows my schedule, knows my security protocols, knows how long poison takes to work." He put his phone away. "I need to identify the traitor on the council, and you need protection because the moment they realize you warned me, they'll come for you." Maya should have been terrified, but instead she felt a strange clarity settle over her, the kind that came when you had been waiting for something for so long that when it finally arrived, it felt almost like relief. "I want the name," she said. "Whoever killed my sister. You give me that and I'll help you find your traitor." Dominic went very quiet. Then he said the thing that made everything else make sense. "The same person who poisoned this wine." Maya felt the world tilt. "You know who killed Caroline," she said, "and it was not a question. You've known." Dominic met her eyes in the mirror. "I've suspected. Your sister was an investigative journalist. She was looking into vampire and human government connections. 2 weeks before she died, she requested an interview with me about the treaty enforcement system. I never got the chance to meet her. She was killed before we could talk. And when I started auditing council members' activities last year, I found a pattern. 43 humans dead in 3 years, all ruled natural causes or accidents. 31 of them were journalists, activists, witnesses." He paused. "Your sister was number 17. Maya's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them against the mirror's frame, against the tarnished silver, needing something solid to hold on to. "Who?" she said. Dominic pulled out his phone again and showed her a photo. "Counselor Elizabeth Crow. She runs the Treaty Enforcement Division. She's the one who decides which humans are threats, which ones need to be eliminated to protect vampire secrecy, and she's the one who will kill us both if we can't expose her at tonight's summit." The candles flickered, and Maya looked at the woman in the photo, elegant and cold, emerald silk dress, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "This is the person who murdered my sister," Maya said, and Dominic nodded. "This is the person who just tried to murder me," he said. "We have 4 hours to prove it." Victor cleared his throat from the shadows. "We need to stage the poisoning," he said. "Make it look like you drank. Make them think their plan worked." Dominic was already moving, heading back toward the stairs. Maya followed because there was nothing else to do, because her sister's killer had a name now and a face, and Maya was not going to let her walk away. They came up into the kitchen through the back hallway, and the chaos had gotten worse. Police already arriving, the shift manager talking fast into a phone while someone screamed about calling an ambulance even though Brett was clearly past needing one. Dominic caught the eye of one of his security team and made a small gesture, and the man nodded, disappeared toward the dining room. Maya watched Dominic pull off his coat, mess up his hair, knock over the wine glass so it spilled across the white tablecloth. He arranged himself in the booth to look like someone who had tried to stand and failed, and then his security was there, shouting for help, shouting that the Vampire King was ill. The performance was flawless. Within minutes, the restaurant erupted into different chaos. Vampire dignitaries appearing from other tables, human officials trying to manage the situation, everyone talking at once about protocols and summit delays and what this meant for treaty relations. Maya slipped back toward the kitchen and found Victor waiting for her. "You're on the surveillance footage," he said flatly, passing him the note. "Taking his table. In 30 minutes, every vampire house in the city will have that footage. You just became a target." Maya had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud still made her stomach drop. "What do I do?" she asked, and hated how her voice sounded, small and scared. Victor looked at her for a long moment and then pulled out a phone, typed something. "You come with us," he said. "Dominic's orders. You're under his protection now, whether you like it or not." They went down through the delivery tunnels, old brick passages that ran under the block, used for bringing in supplies without disrupting the main entrance. The walls were wet with condensation, and the air smelled like damp earth and old metal, and somewhere far above, Maya could hear the kitchen timer ringing again, could hear the muffled screams as someone else found something terrible. "She's a liability," Victor said to Dominic, when they reached the underground parking garage where 3 black cars waited. "End this." Dominic opened the rear door of the middle car. "She's the only person in that room who didn't want me dead," he said. "Calculate the value of that." Maya climbed into the car and watched the vermilion room disappear behind them through the tinted windows, watched her normal life, her safe life, her invisible life, vanish like it had never existed at all. Her apartment would be raided within the hour. Her co-workers would be questioned. Her name would be flagged in systems she did not know existed. And somewhere in the city, Counselor Elizabeth Crow would be receiving confirmation that her poison had worked, that the Vampire King was incapacitated, that the plan was proceeding exactly as designed. Except it was not. And Maya was going to make sure Crow understood that before the night was over. The archive was not what Maya expected, not some Gothic library with leather books and stained glass, but an industrial warehouse on the edge of the district, where shipping containers got unloaded and nobody asked questions about what was inside them. Dominic led her through a reinforced door that required 3 separate locks and a keypad code, and inside the space opened up into rows of metal shelving that stretched back into shadow, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting everything in cold white that made the dust in the air visible like static. Files in acid-free boxes lined every shelf, labeled with decades instead of years, 1920s through 1980s on the left side, 1990s through present on the right. And Maya understood she was looking at the hidden history of a city that pretended vampires were mythology and treaties were fiction. Victor stayed by the door, watching the street through a small window, hands still near his weapon, because apparently Maya being proven truthful by an ancient mirror did not mean she was trusted, just that she was temporarily useful. Dominic moved through the shelves like he had the layout memorized, which he probably did, which he probably came here often enough that the path was worn into his memory, the way Maya's route through the vermilion room was worn into hers. He stopped at a section labeled 2022 and pulled down a box, set it on a metal table under the only desk lamp in the whole warehouse, the kind with a flexible neck that pooled yellow light in a small circle and left everything else in fluorescent shadow. Caroline Reeves, the label read, and Maya's heart stopped. Dominic opened the box, and inside were file folders, photographs, interview transcripts, and on top an autopsy report with natural causes stamped in red across the front page. "I didn't know her name until tonight," Dominic said quietly, and he was not looking at Maya, was looking at the photograph of Caroline clipped to the inside of the folder, her press badge photo from the newspaper where she had worked. "I'm sorry." Maya felt something crack open in her chest. 3 years of grief that she had kept controlled, kept functional, kept buried under double shifts and rent payments and the mechanical process of surviving. "You're sorry," she said, and her voice came out breaking. She was going to teach me to surf that summer. She bought the boards already, had them in her garage, was planning this whole trip down the coast. She never got to take me because she died choking on wine at a charity gala while people stood around and watched. Maya stopped, pressed her hands flat on the table, breathed. "Show me how to make Crow pay." Dominic pulled out the first file and spread the contents across the table under the lamp. Caroline Reeves, investigative journalist, had spent 8 months tracking connections between city government and what she had called in her notes unusual enforcement patterns. She had noticed that certain criminals disappeared before trial, that certain witnesses recanted testimony overnight, that certain activists stopped organizing after private meetings with officials. She had started with human corruption and followed the thread until it led her somewhere humans were not supposed to look, into the Treaty of Iron and Glass. Maya read her sister's handwriting in the margins of interview transcripts, the neat print that Caroline had used for everything, grocery lists and birthday cards, and apparently documentation of a centuries-old pact between vampire houses and human governments. The treaty allowed vampires to manage human criminals in exchange for maintaining secrecy, for staying hidden, for not disrupting the careful fiction that let both worlds coexist. It was supposed to be about actual criminals, rapists, and murderers, and people who fell through the cracks of human justice. But Caroline had found something else. She had found a list. 43 names over 3 years, all ruled natural causes or accidents, all dead within weeks of investigating vampire-connected activities. Journalists who asked wrong questions. Activists who organized in wrong neighborhoods. Witnesses who saw wrong things. And at the bottom of every death, one signature on the authorization forms. Counselor Elizabeth Crow, Treaty Enforcement Division. Maya's hands were shaking, and she flipped through the files faster, seeing her sister's work, seeing the proof Caroline had died trying to publish. Crow had been killing anyone who threatened vampire secrecy, and using the treaty to make it legal, to make it sanctioned, to make it disappear into bureaucratic paperwork that nobody questioned. Caroline had figured it out, had documented it, had requested an interview with Dominic 2 weeks before her death because she wanted to know if the Vampire King knew what his council member was doing, and Crow had killed her before that interview could happen. "Your sister wasn't collateral damage," Dominic said, and he was reading the same files Maya was reading, his face carefully neutral. She was a target. She found the proof, and Crow had her eliminated under treaty authority, listed her as a potential security threat, made it legal. Maya felt rage rise up in her throat like bile. She punched the filing cabinet next to the table, felt the metal edge cut into her knuckles, did not care. Caroline had died because she was good at her job, because she asked questions, because she believed people deserved to know the truth. And some vampire bureaucrat had signed a form and made her disappear. Maya pulled her hand back and saw blood on her knuckles, but did not feel the pain, did not feel anything except the need to make Crow hurt the way Caroline had hurt. Dominic took her hand gently, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wrapped it around her knuckles with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with bleeding before. "You approved this treaty," Maya said, and it was not a question. Dominic finished tying the handkerchief and did not let go of her hand. "Yes," he said, 60 years ago, when it was supposed to be about justice, about handling the humans your courts couldn't touch. I didn't understand how it would be abused. I didn't audit the enforcement division until last year. By then, Crow had been killing for 3 years. He paused. I've been trying to dismantle it from inside. Quietly. Carefully. And she found out. Maya looked at him and saw something she had not expected. Guilt. Real guilt. The kind that came from knowing you had built something that killed people. The The kind that made you spend years in a warehouse going through files of the dead, learning their names, trying to figure out how to make it right. Tonight's poison was supposed to look like a food allergy, Dominic said. Natural causes. Maintains treaty secrecy. If I had drunk it, Crow would have taken my council seat, would have controlled enforcement completely, would have killed anyone else who asked questions. He reached up and pulled off his signet ring, the heavy silver one that marked him as Vampire King, and set it on the table between them. Not a symbol of authority now, a gesture of equals. I need your help, he said. I need you to testify at the summit tonight, to tell the council what you saw, what you know, to stand in front of them and make them see what Crow has done. Maya stared at the ring. The summit has rules, Dominic continued. Once you enter, you're under council law, sovereign territory. If we fail, if they don't believe us, the treaty allows Crow to execute us both. No human court, no appeal. You walk in there and you're gambling your life on whether I can convince 12 vampires that one of their own is corrupt. Maya picked up Caroline's autopsy report, looked at the red stamp, looked at her sister's name typed neatly at the top. Then don't fall, she said. Dominic nodded slowly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the dust caught the light. And outside the warehouse, the city continued pretending that treaties were myths, and vampires were stories, and people like Caroline just died sometimes. Bad luck, natural causes, nothing to investigate. But Maya knew now. Knew that her sister had been murdered by the same person who tried to murder Dominic. Knew that Crow had weaponized the treaty into an execution system. Knew that if they walked into the summit tonight, they were walking into a room full of predators and hoping that truth mattered more than power. She looked at Dominic and saw him watching her, waiting for her to understand the full cost. You need me because I'm human, Maya said, because if you accuse Crow alone, it's vampire politics. But if I testify, if I show them what she did to Caroline, to the others, it becomes something they can't ignore. It becomes proof that the treaty is broken, that keeping it means condoning murder. Dominic's expression did not change, but something in his eyes confirmed she was right. You're asking me to be the evidence, Maya said. The living proof that Crow kills witnesses, that she abuses treaty authority, that the system you built has killed 43 people. Yes, Dominic said simply. And in exchange, Maya said slowly, thinking it through, saying it out loud so they both understood the terms. You give me the files. You give me everything Caroline found. You let me publish it. You let me clear her name and prosecute Crow under human law if we survive the council. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed Caroline's file and pushed the entire box toward Maya. It's already yours, he said. Everything in this archive, every file on every kill Crow authorized. If we walk out of the summit alive, I'll testify in human court myself. I'll burn the treaty down if that's what it takes. Maya felt the weight of the box, the physical reality of 43 lives documented in paper and ink in her sister's handwriting. She felt the fluorescent lights buzz overhead in the cold warehouse air, and the knowledge that in 3 hours she would walk into a room full of vampires and accuse one of them of murder. She felt Dominic's ring still sitting on the table between them, his authority set aside, his admission that he needed her as much as she needed him. This is the midpoint, Maya thought. This is where everything changes. Before tonight, she had been trying to survive, trying to understand, trying to make sense of Caroline's death. Now she knew. Now she had proof. Now she had a name and a face and a vampire king willing to risk his own life to make it right. And the only way forward was through a summit that could kill them both. She picked up the ring and held it out to Dominic. He took it, but did not put it back on, just held it in his palm, like he was weighing what it meant. Victor called from the door. We have 2 hours before the summit. If we're doing this, we need to prepare. Maya looked at Caroline's file one more time, at her sister's face in the press badge photo, young and alive and believing that truth mattered. Then she looked at Dominic and nodded. Show me what I need to know, she said. Show me how to walk into that room and make them listen. And Dominic smiled, a small, dangerous thing. I'll show you how to make them afraid, he said, because fear is the only thing the council respects. They left the archive with the box of files, with the evidence, with the ammunition they would need to survive the next 4 hours. And Maya understood with perfect clarity that she had just chosen to enter a world that did not forgive mistakes, that did not offer second chances, that would kill her the moment she stopped being useful. But Caroline had not gotten a choice. Brett had not gotten a choice. 41 others had not gotten a choice. So Maya would choose for all of them. She would walk into the summit, and she would tell the truth, and she would make Crow answer for every single name in that box. Or she would die trying. Dominic's tailor arrived at the safe house exactly 90 minutes before the summit, a thin man with measuring tape draped around his neck and a garment bag that probably cost more than Maya made in a year. And the first thing he did was pull out a dress in deep crimson that made Maya's stomach turn because she knew what it meant. Traditional vampire client attire, he said, laying it across the back of the sofa with the reverence people usually reserved for religious artifacts. It will show the council you accept the Vampire King's protection, that you understand your place. Maya looked at the dress and thought about Caroline, about her sister who had never accepted anyone's version of her place, who had walked into rooms full of powerful people and demanded answers. I'm not wearing that, Maya said flatly. The tailor blinked. It's custom, he said. It's expected. When a human appears before the council under vampire protection, they wear house colors. They display the relationship. Maya crossed her arms. I'm not most humans, she said. And it's not favor, it's a deal. Business attire. Deep gray. No jewelry. Nothing that says I belong to anyone. The tailor looked at Dominic, who was standing by the window watching the street below, and Dominic turned around with something that might have been amusement in his expression. Give her what she wants, he said. She's right. This isn't a display of ownership. It's a partnership. The tailor sighed but pulled out different options, and an hour later, Maya stood in front of a mirror wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like it had been made for her because it had, jacket tailored to her shoulders, pants that broke exactly at her shoes, the whole ensemble speaking the language of boardrooms and courtrooms and places where power was negotiated instead of commanded. She looked like someone who had walked into the summit by choice, not by compulsion. Dominic stood beside her and started teaching her the rules. Never break eye contact when challenged, he said. The council will test you. They'll stare until you flinch. If you look away first, you've admitted weakness. Maya nodded, filed it away. Never touch another vampire's human, Dominic continued. They're property under council law. Touching them is claiming them. It will start a blood challenge and you'll be dead before you can explain it was an accident. Maya felt her skin crawl at the casual mention of humans as property, but kept her expression neutral. And never speak a lie in the council chamber, Dominic said, and his voice went very serious. The room itself will expose you. It's built around a circular mirror. Everything you say, everything you do, will be reflected and amplified. Lies distort, truth holds. Maya thought about the rite of glass in the wine cellar, about seeing Caroline die in the mirror's reflection. This would be that times 100, times 1,000, her words tested in front of 12 vampire houses. No pressure, she said, and Dominic almost smiled. You'll do fine, he said. You've already passed one mirror test. This is just a bigger audience. They took 2 cars to the summit, Victor driving the lead vehicle with additional security, Dominic and Maya in the second car with darkened windows that turned the city outside into shadows and streetlights. Maya watched the buildings change from industrial to historic, from functional to ornate, until they pulled up in front of a converted opera house that looked like it had been built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Black marble steps led up to doors twice the height of a normal entrance, gold trim everywhere. the kind of architecture that announced wealth and power and centuries of both. Council members were already arriving, vampires in formal attire with human entourages that moved like well-trained dancers, never stepping wrong, never speaking unless addressed. Maya counted 12 different groups, 12 houses, each one radiating the kind of presence that made normal humans cross the street without knowing why. And there, near the center of the foyer, was Counselor Elizabeth Crow. She wore emerald silk that caught the light like water, her hair pulled back severe and elegant, flanked by two human assistants who stood too still, who breathed too carefully, who looked like they had been trained to be furniture. Crow saw Maya and went very quiet, the kind of quiet that came before explosions. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Vampire to vampire, the supernatural equivalent of phones buzzing with gossip. Dominic brought a human witness. This hasn't happened in 70 years. Can he do that? What does it mean? Maya felt every eye in the foyer turn toward her and fought to keep her breathing steady, to keep her expression calm, to remember that she had chosen this, that Caroline deserved this, that 43 people deserved someone to stand in front of the council and name their killer. Crow glided forward, her assistants following exactly 3 steps behind, and her smile was polished and cold. "Dominic," she said, and her voice carried across the foyer like she was performing for an audience. "You bring company." How quaint. Does she speak or simply stand decoratively? Maya felt rage flash hot in her chest, but Dominic spoke before she could. "She speaks truths you've spent 3 years burying, Elizabeth," he said, and his voice was cold as winter, cold as something that could kill you without ever raising its temperature. The room went even quieter. Crow's smile tightened at the edges. "Careful, Dominic," she said. "Accusations without evidence are unbecoming of a king." Maya stepped forward before Dominic could respond, before anyone could stop her. "Then let's talk about evidence," she said, and her voice came out steady and clear. "And Caroline Reeves, and the Treaty of Iron and Glass." The foyer erupted in murmurs, council members turning to each other, humans whispering behind hands, the careful facade of civility cracking. Crow's smile evaporated completely. She raised one hand and the room fell silent. And Maya understood she was watching someone who knew how to command attention, who had spent decades learning the levers of power. "I invoke guest challenge," Crow said, and the formal weight of the words made them sound like a legal proceeding. "This human has no standing before the council. She cannot justify her presence. I move for her removal. Permanent removal." Maya felt Victor tense beside her, felt Dominic's hand hover near her elbow, felt the weight of 12 vampire houses watching to see what would happen next. Then Dominic stepped between Maya and Crow, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a king who had ruled for longer than Maya's family had existed. "I invoke witness bond," he said. "Maya Reeves is under my direct protection and testimony authority. She stands here by my invitation and by council law. Any challenge to her is a challenge to me." The room reacted, some council members nodding approval, others frowning, calculating what this meant for alliances and politics. Crow's expression went very still. "A witness bond requires blood seal," she said, "public and binding. Are you certain you want to tie yourself to a human server, Dominic? Do you understand what that costs?" Dominic pulled a small silver knife from his jacket pocket, the kind that looked ceremonial and ancient. "I understand perfectly," he said, and cut his palm. One drop of blood welled up, dark and viscous. Maya knew what was coming, had been briefed on it in the car. The blood seal would mark her as Dominic's for 30 days, or until the bond was formally dissolved. It would make her untouchable by other vampires, protected by his authority. It would also make her a target for anyone who wanted to hurt him, a vulnerability he was choosing to accept publicly. She held out her wrist. Dominic pressed his bleeding palm to her skin, and she felt the blood touch her, felt it burn cold and then warm, felt something settle into her bones that was not quite magic, but was definitely not natural. The mark appeared on her wrist, a silver pattern like frost on glass, visible to everyone in the foyer. The room reacted. Some council members nodded, recognizing the bond as legitimate. Others looked at Crow to see how she would respond. Crow's expression had gone to stone, all pretense of charm abandoned. Victor leaned close to Dominic and whispered, "You just made her a priority target. Every vampire here knows a witness bond means you have evidence." Dominic did not take his eyes off Crow. "I'm counting on it," he said quietly. The doors to the council chamber opened, massive and ornate, and a voice called the session to order. Maya walked through those doors with Dominic beside her and Victor behind her, and she stepped into a space that took her breath away. The opera house had been converted into something between a courtroom and a cathedral, the red velvet seats removed to create an open floor of black marble, the soaring ceiling painted with frescoes of historical vampire and human treaties, moments frozen in art where the two species had negotiated peace or war or coexistence. Chandeliers dripped crystal overhead, casting everything in light that refracted and multiplied. And in the center of the chamber, taking up a space 20 feet in diameter, was a circular mirror. Not a mirror on a wall, but a mirror set into the floor, perfectly level, perfectly clear, reflecting the ceiling and the chandeliers and everyone who walked past it. The council chamber's heart, where truth would be tested, where lies would distort, where Maya would have to stand and speak, and hope that the reflection held. 12 chairs arranged in a semicircle around the mirror, each one occupied by a vampire who had lived long enough to accumulate power and ruthlessness in equal measure. Crow took her seat, her human assistant standing behind her like statues. Other council members settled in, their entourages arranging themselves in designated areas. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax, and something metallic that Maya could not identify, fear or blood or both. Surveillance cameras in every corner, red lights blinking, feeding to watchers Maya could not see. Dominic led her to a space near the mirror's edge, a position that put her in full view of every council member and their reflection. "This is where you'll testify," he said quietly. "This is where you'll tell them everything." Maya looked at the mirror and saw herself reflected, small and human and wearing a gray suit in a room full of predators. She saw the mark on her wrist glowing silver. She saw Dominic beside her, his expression carefully neutral, his hand near hers, but not touching. And she saw Crow across the chamber, watching her with the kind of focus that meant calculations were happening, plans were forming, contingencies were being activated. The head of the council, an older vampire with white hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile, called the session to order. "We gather for testimony," he said, and his voice echoed off the walls. "The vampire king Dominic Thorne has invoked witness bond to bring a human before us. This is unprecedented in modern times. We will hear his reasoning." Dominic stepped forward to the edge of the mirror. "3 years ago," he said, "Counselor Elizabeth Crow authorized the execution of 43 humans under treaty authority. She listed them as security threats. She made their deaths legal under our law. But they were not criminals. They were journalists, activists, witnesses, and one of them was this woman's sister." The chamber erupted, council members talking over each other, humans whispering, Crow standing up from her chair. Dominic raised his voice. "I have evidence," he said. "I have documentation, and I have a witness who can testify to the pattern of abuse. Who can name the dead? Who can tell you what the treaty has become under Crow's enforcement?" The head of the council looked at Maya. "You are Maya Reeves," he said, "sister to Caroline Reeves, journalist. You claim Counselor Crow murdered your sister." "Yes," Maya said, and stepped to the mirror's edge and looked at her reflection, and prepared to tell the truth that would either save them or kill them both. Dominic stood at the edge of the circular mirror and laid out his evidence with the precision of a prosecutor who had been building a case for months, which he had. He held up documentation printed on council letterhead, kill orders signed by Elizabeth Crowe, 43 names spanning 3 years, each one approved under treaty authority as a security threat to vampire secrecy. 12 of these individuals had criminal records, Dominic said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Rapists, murderers, people who fell through human justice systems. The treaty was designed for them. But 31 had no criminal history. They were journalists investigating government corruption, activists organizing in neighborhoods where vampires conducted business, witnesses to treaty violations. He paused, let the numbers sink in. Caroline Reeves was number 17. She was an investigative journalist who discovered the Treaty of Iron and Glass. She requested an interview with me about enforcement patterns. 2 weeks later, Councillor Crowe had her killed at a charity gala. Poisoned wine, listed as natural causes. The council chamber was silent except for the sound of paper rustling as Dominic distributed copies of the files, the kill orders, the falsified records, the payoffs to coroners who changed autopsy results. Maya watched the council members read, watched their expressions shift from skepticism to concern to calculation, watched them understand that this was not political maneuvering, but documented fact. Crowe stood from her chair, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost amused. "The treaty allows discretion," she said. "It gives enforcement authority the power to assess threats and neutralize them before they compromise vampire security." Every person on Dominic's list was investigated. Every one was determined to pose a risk to our existence. I protected our kind from exposure. That is my job. Dominic's audit is not reform. It is treason against vampire security. The room shifted, council members leaning forward, and Maya saw the trap Crowe was setting. She was not denying the kills. She was justifying them. She was making this about whether the council valued secrecy over individual human lives, and Maya knew from 3 years of researching her sister's death that powerful people almost always chose secrecy. Crowe raised her hand, and the chamber went quiet. "I call for a conclave vote," she said, and the formal words made several council members stiffen. Should this council censure Dominic Thorne for undermining treaty enforcement and destabilizing human relations? If the vote passes, he loses his council seat. His human witness loses all protection. She will be declared a treaty violator under the Knowledge Clause and subject to immediate sanction. Maya felt the floor drop out from under her. Knowledge Clause. She had learned too much, seen too much. If Dominic lost his seat, she would be killed legally, officially. No human court involved. Crowe smiled, polished and cold. "I have 6 votes," she said, looking at the council members who had already nodded to her. "I need 7 of 12 to win." The chamber erupted into negotiation, vampire politics happening in real time, council members clustering in groups, whispering, calculating alliances and debts, and whether supporting Dominic or Crowe would benefit their houses more. Maya watched the room fracture and understood she was watching a system that had operated for centuries, that had survived by prioritizing survival over justice, secrecy over accountability. Dominic held 4 loyalists, vampires who had supported his reforms before, who believed the treaty had become corrupt. But 2 were undecided, Councillor Yuki Tanaka and Councillor James Moreau, and they stood apart from the clusters, watching, waiting. Maya's mind raced. Tanaka and Moreau would not vote on principle alone. They needed proof that Crowe's actions threatened their own houses, that her corruption was not contained, that supporting her meant accepting risk. And suddenly Maya understood. The surveillance footage from the restaurant. Brett's murder. If Crowe had ordered the poisoning, her people would have left evidence. Each vampire house had signature methods, trademarks, ways of killing that marked territory, and sent messages. If Brett had been killed by Crow's people, the body would tell them. Maya pulled out her phone and texted Victor, who was still at the Vermilion Room coordinating cleanup, managing the police, keeping the scene contained. She typed fast. Need surveillance footage from kitchen tonight. Need Brett's body examined for house marks. Crow's signature is silver wire garrote. Check for it. Urgent. The phone buzzed back 30 seconds later, checking now. Maya looked at the council vote happening around her, at Crow counting her supporters, at Dominic watching the undecided vampires like he was calculating odds that were not in his favor. She looked at the mirror beneath her feet and saw the chamber reflected, saw the chandeliers and the frescoes and herself, small and human and marked with silver on her wrist. Her phone buzzed again. Found it. Brett was killed with silver wire. Crow's house trademark. Pulling footage now. Sending to your phone. Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked up at Dominic and caught his eye, held up her phone. He understood immediately, crossed to her in 3 steps. What do you have? He asked quietly. And Maya showed him Victor's text. Dominic's expression went very still, the kind of still that came before violence. He turned to the council. I have additional evidence, he said, and his voice cut through the negotiations like a blade. Evidence that Councillor Crow violated treaty law tonight, that she killed a human witness to her own crime, that she attempted to assassinate a sitting council member. Crow's smile evaporated. She moved toward Dominic, but he held up his hand. Maya Reeves will present the evidence, he said, as is her right under witness bond. Maya stepped to the center of the mirror and pulled out her phone, connected it to the chamber's projection system, the same screens used for official council business. The footage loaded and filled the wall behind her, grainy security camera video from the Vermilion Room's kitchen. The timestamp read 6 hours ago. The video showed a woman in restaurant uniform moving through the kitchen, pulling a small vial from her pocket, emptying it into a wine glass. Maya froze the frame and zoomed in on the woman's face. That is Crow's human assistant, she said, pointing to the woman who was currently standing behind Crow's chair in the council chamber. She poisoned the wine meant for Dominic. The chamber erupted, but Maya kept talking, kept the footage playing. Watch what happens next, she said. Brett, the server who was supposed to deliver the wine, entered the kitchen. He saw the assistant lacing the glass. He understood what he was seeing, and he ran. The footage showed Brett turning, running toward the freezer, the assistant following. The camera angle cut out, tampered with, but Maya had the next piece ready. The body tells the rest, she said, and pulled up the photo Victor had sent, Brett's throat showing the thin, deep line of a silver wire garrote, the signature kill method of Crow's house. Crow killed her own agent's witness using treaty authority. Then she tried to kill the Vampire King when he got too close to the pattern. Tanaka stood from her chair, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp. This changes the calculation, she said. If Crow is eliminating witnesses to her own crimes, if she is targeting council members, the treaty authority has been weaponized beyond its intent. Moreau nodded slowly. I agree, he said. This is not enforcement. This is consolidation of power. I vote against censure. Tanaka followed. Against censure, she said. The room shifted, the vote swinging, 6 for Crow and 6 against, deadlocked. The head of the council looked at Crow. You have a response, Counselor. Crow's expression had gone to stone, but Maya saw something else underneath. Desperation masked as confidence. She stepped to the mirror's edge, and when she spoke, her voice was cold and clear. Dominic wants to burn the treaty and expose us all, she said. He wants to dismantle the enforcement system that has kept humans from hunting us for 60 years. Is that the future you want? Humans with torches at our doors. Humans passing laws against us. The treaty is the only thing standing between us and extinction, and you are voting to destroy it because one vampire king has a conscience. Dominic moved to face her across the mirror. I want a treaty that doesn't require us to murder innocents, he said. I want a system that distinguishes between actual threats and inconvenient witnesses. If that is radical, if that is treason, then this council is already dead. The chamber went silent. And then Crow played her final card. She pulled a silver blade from her sleeve, old and ceremonial, and held it up. I invoke ancient right of personal combat, she said, and the formal words made the air feel heavier, made the chandeliers seem to dim. Dominic has accused me of treason. Let him prove it with blood, not words. Single combat now, in this chamber. The winner's version of events becomes council truth. Maya felt ice slide down her spine. She looked at Dominic and saw exhaustion in the lines of his face, saw the way he was holding himself too carefully, saw that he had been awake for 24 hours and had not fed and had spent the last 6 hours in political combat. Crow was fresh. Crow was vicious. Crow was going to kill him. But Dominic nodded. I accept, he said, because Maya understood if he refused, Crow would invoke the same challenge against her as the witness bondholder, and Maya had no vampire combat training, no supernatural strength, no chance of surviving. Dominic was buying her life with his own. The council members stood and formed a ring around the mirror, ancient and gladiatorial. The kind of thing that should not happen in a modern city, but here they were. Crow removed her jacket, rolled her shoulders, smiled. Dominic unbuttoned his cuffs, and Maya saw his hands shake slightly before he controlled them. The fight started fast. Crow moved like water, like something that had spent centuries learning how to kill efficiently, and she went for Dominic's throat immediately. He blocked, countered, moved defensively because he was buying time, because he was trusting Maya to find the opening the way she had found the poisoned wine, the way she had found the surveillance footage. Maya forced herself to watch the mirror, not the fight. Watched the reflections move across the polished surface, watched Crow's image and Dominic's image clash and separate and clash again. The fight was brutal. Dominic landed a hit that should have slowed Crow down, but she absorbed it and kept coming. She got inside his guard and drove her blade toward his chest, and he twisted, took the cut on his shoulder instead, blood dark against his white shirt. The smell of it filled the chamber, copper and salt and something else, something that made the other vampires lean forward. Crow pressed her advantage, drove Dominic back toward the edge of the mirror, and Maya saw him faltering, saw his defense weakening. Crow got her hand around his throat, forced him down to his knees at the mirror's edge, and Maya saw her raising the blade for a killing strike. And then Maya saw the reflection. Crow's face was cold, controlled, the face of someone doing an unpleasant but necessary job. But in the mirror, her reflection was smiling. Not a small smile, not a grim satisfaction, but a wide, delighted grin. The expression of someone who was enjoying this, who was savoring the kill. The mirror, Maya shouted, her voice cracking. Look at her reflection, she's smiling. Every council member turned to look at the mirror. Saw Crow's reflection grinning while her real face remained neutral. Saw the truth the mirror exposed, that this was not about honor or defense or justice, that Crow was enjoying the execution. Tanaka stepped forward, her voice sharp. Crow, she said, you have violated the spirit of combat. This is not honor. This is execution. Ancient right requires defending yourself, not enjoying the kill. The fight stops now. Crow froze, blade still raised, and for 1 second, Maya thought she would bring it down anyway, would kill Dominic and deal with the consequences. But Moreau stepped into the ring, put his hand on Crow's wrist. Enough, he said. The mirror has spoken. You have lost by exposure, not defeat. Crow's control shattered. She spun toward Maya, dropped Dominic, and lunged across the mirror with the blade still in her hand and murder in her eyes. But Victor was already moving, intercepting her, disarming her in 2 efficient movements and forcing her to the ground. The chamber erupted in noise. council members shouting, humans backing away, the careful order of the summit dissolving. Maya ran to Dominic, who was bleeding from the shoulder, breathing hard, and he looked at her with something that might have been gratitude or might have been exhaustion. "You found it," he said quietly. "The mirror. I told you truth matters." Maya looked at Crow on the ground, at Victor holding her, at the council members forming a new kind of circle, the kind that came before judgment. Tanaka spoke first. "Elizabeth Crow," she said, "you are stripped of your council seat effective immediately. Your enforcement authority is revoked, your house marks will be investigated, and you will stand trial under both vampire and human law for the murders you have committed." Crow finally showed her real face, rage and desperation, and something that looked like fear. "You are all fools!" she screamed. "The treaty is the only thing keeping humans from torching our houses. Dominic's reform is a death sentence. You will see. You will all see." The head of the council gestured, and security pulled Crow from the chamber, her voice echoing back through the doors until it cut off completely. Maya stood in the silence that followed, her hands clenched so hard her nails had drawn blood, her whole body shaking with adrenaline she could not release. She looked at the mirror beneath her feet and saw the chamber reflected, saw the council members, and the blood on the floor and herself, still standing, still marked with silver. Dominic got to his feet slowly, Victor supporting him, and looked at the council. "The treaty needs reform," he said. "Not destruction. Reform. A system that protects vampire secrecy without requiring us to murder innocents. If you cannot support that, then I cannot support this council." The room was silent, and then Tanaka nodded. "I will support reform," she said, "under conditions, with oversight." "But yes." Moreau followed. "Agreed," he said. One by one, the council members voted, and when the count finished, it was 8-4 in favor of treaty reform. Not unanimous, not perfect, but enough. Maya felt something loosen in her chest, 3 years of grief and rage finally finding an outlet, finally finding justice. She had the evidence. She had Crow's confession on record. She had the council's acknowledgement that the system was broken. It was not everything Caroline had wanted, but it was a start. Dominic looked at her across the mirror and nodded once, a gesture that said, "We did it. We survived. We won." And Maya nodded back, understanding that the cost of that win was permanent entanglement in a world she had only glimpsed before tonight, that she could never go back to being just a waitress, just a sister, just someone trying to survive. She was a witness now. She was marked. She was part of the vampire world whether she wanted to be or not. The summit ended, and the council members dispersed, and Maya walked out of the opera house into air that smelled like rain and exhaust and normal city night. But nothing felt normal. Nothing would ever feel normal again. 3 days later, Maya stood in the walk-in freezer at the Vermilion Room and looked at the floor where Brett had died. The restaurant had hired a professional cleaning crew, the kind that specialized in crime scenes, and they had scrubbed everything down to the concrete. But Maya could still see the outline where his body had fallen, a shadow that was not really there but lived in her memory anyway. The freezer hummed around her, cold and sterile and fluorescent bright, a marked contrast to the gothic aesthetic of the council chamber with its candles and mirrors and centuries of ritual. This was her world, or it had been, stainless steel and health code compliance, and the mechanical process of keeping food cold enough that people did not get sick. The restaurant had reopened yesterday. Life continued. People ordered wine and steaks and desserts and had no idea that a server had been murdered here, that a vampire king had nearly been poisoned at table 12, that the whole careful fiction of the city's peace had almost shattered. Maya had been offered a position on Dominic's household staff 2 days ago, delivered via formal letter on council letterhead, official title, Human Liaison, Real job help reform the treaty from inside. It paid more than she had ever made, included housing, included protection, included entry into a world that most humans never saw, and most who saw it did not survive. She had not decided yet. The freezer door opened and Dominic stepped inside, utterly out of place in his tailored coat, among the hanging meat and produce, and Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of a vampire king standing between sides of beef in a walk-in freezer. He was healing from the fight with Crow, the gash on his shoulder still visible under his shirt collar, the kind of wound that would have hospitalized a human, but for him was already closing, already fading into a scar that would disappear in another week. He carried a box under one arm, the same acid-free file box from the archive, and Maya knew without asking what was inside. Caroline's original research files, everything her sister had compiled before her death, 8 months of investigation into the Treaty of Iron and Glass and the people who were abusing it. For publication, Dominic said, setting the box on the metal shelf next to the lettuce. Under your name, she would want you to finish it. Maya took the box and felt its weight, literal and metaphorical, the responsibility of 43 names and 43 stories, and the truth that Caroline had died trying to tell. Why give me the files? She asked. You could bury them forever. Nobody would question a vampire king keeping his archives private. Dominic looked at her with something that might have been sadness. Because you'll do what I couldn't, he said. You'll make them matter in the human world. You'll publish them in newspapers and courts and places where vampires have no authority. That's worth more than any council vote. Maya opened the box and saw her sister's handwriting again, the neat print on interview notes and evidence logs, and felt 3 years of grief finally starting to process into something else, into purpose. She looked at Dominic and asked the question that had haunted her since the wine cellar. Did you know my sister was going to die and do nothing? Dominic met her eyes and did not look away. No, he said, but I knew the system that killed her and did too little, too slowly. I approved the treaty 60 years ago. I let the council operate without oversight. I built the structure that Crow weaponized. He paused. I won't make that mistake again. Maya believed him, which surprised her, which maybe should not have surprised her because she had seen him nearly die defending her testimony, had seen him risk his council seat to expose Crow, had seen him give her the one thing that could destroy vampire secrecy completely if she chose to publish it all. She closed the box. I'll take the position, she said. Not for you, for Caroline, for Brett. For the next person Crow's allies target. She paused. One condition. The witness bond ends today. I won't be marked as yours. If I do this, I do it as a free agent. Dominic nodded slowly, and Maya saw something in his expression that looked like respect. The bond was protection, but it was also possession, a visible claim that she belonged to the Vampire King's household, and ending it meant she would be more vulnerable but also more her own. Agreed, Dominic said. He pulled out the same ceremonial silver knife he had used at the summit, cut his palm, let one drop of blood well up dark and viscous. Maya took the knife and cut her own palm, felt the sting and the warmth, let her blood mix with his. They found a wine glass in the freezer storage, the kind used for tastings, and mixed their blood in cheap red wine that probably cost $8 a bottle. The dissolution ritual was simpler than the bonding, just blood and wine poured onto stone, the concrete floor of the freezer serving as altar. Maya felt the mark on her wrist burn cold and then fade, the silver pattern disappearing like frost melting, and with it went the supernatural weight of being bound to Dominic's protection and authority. She was free. She was also more exposed than she had been in 3 days. This doesn't mean I trust you, Maya said, watching the wine and blood seep into the concrete. Dominic wrapped his palm in a handkerchief. Good, he said. Trust is earned. I'm still earning it. They stood in the freezer for another moment, formal but sad, losing a connection even as they were gaining a partnership. And then Dominic left through the delivery entrance, and Maya was alone with Caroline's files and the memory of Brett's body and the cold fluorescent light that made everything look clinical and distant. She carried the box out into the kitchen where the evening shift was starting. Line cooks prepping stations, dishwashers filling sinks, the mechanical ballet of a restaurant coming to life. Jenna was behind the bar polishing glasses, and when she saw Maya, she waved, tried to smile, the expression not quite reaching her eyes because Brett had been her friend too, and the official story was robbery gone wrong. But Jenna was not stupid. Jenna knew something else had happened, even if she did not know what. The kitchen timer beeped, bright and cheerful, someone's souffle ready to serve. And Maya felt the surreal disconnect of standing in a place where normal life continued while she carried a box full of evidence that could rewrite the city's hidden history. She walked through the dining room where tables were being set for the dinner service. White tablecloths and polished silverware and crimson velvet booths that looked exactly the same as they had 3 days ago when she had delivered poisoned wine to table 12 and saved a vampire king's life without meaning to. The front windows showed the street outside, dark now, rain starting to fall, and Maya stopped to look at her reflection in the glass. Behind her, the dining room glowed warm and familiar. The world she had known for 4 years, the world of third-shift waitressing and rent payments, and the small, invisible life of someone trying to survive. Ahead of her, the street was wet pavement reflecting neon and streetlights, the sound of traffic muffled by rain, the city continuing its night without knowing or caring that the treaty between humans and vampires had just been reformed, that a council member had been stripped of power, that the careful balance of secrecy and exposure had shifted. Maya could see both worlds now, reflected in the glass, caught between them, no longer fully part of either. She adjusted her coat, the same charcoal gray one from the summit that was hers now, tailored and professional in speaking a language she was still learning. A black car pulled up to the curb outside, Dominic's people waiting to take her to her first official meeting as human liaison, whatever that actually meant, whatever she was going to make it mean. Maya pulled out her phone to text them that she was coming, and a message arrived from an unknown number. Your sister wasn't the first journalist. She was the 17th. I have names for the other 16. Are you interested? Maya stared at the message, her heart suddenly loud in her ears, and before she could respond or screenshot or do anything, the text deleted itself, 3 seconds, and then gone like it had never existed. She looked at the black car waiting outside, at the reflection of the dining room behind her, at the box of Caroline's files in her arms. She thought about 16 other journalists, 16 other people who had asked wrong questions and died for it, 16 other families who deserved to know what happened. She thought about Crow in custody, but Crow's allies still on the council, still in positions of power, still operating under a treaty that had been reformed but not dismantled. Caroline, Maya whispered to her own reflection, to the memory of her sister, to the ghost that lived in her grief. I'm finishing what you started. Watch me. She pushed open the door and stepped into the rain, felt it cold on her face and hands, felt the transition from one world to another, from waitress to operative, from victim sister to active threat. The black car's door opened and she climbed inside, set the box of files on the seat beside her, and looked back at the vermilion room one last time. Dominic was right. The council was fractured. Crow had allies. They would come for Maya eventually, would try to eliminate the human who knew too much, who had too much evidence, who was too dangerous to leave alive. But Maya had walked into a freezer where a coworker had died, and she had walked out carrying the proof that would make his death mean something. She had stood in a council chamber full of vampires, and she had found the truth in a mirror, and she had survived. Let them come, she thought. Let them try. I know where the freezer is. The car pulled away from the curb, and Maya watched the restaurant disappear behind them, watched her old life fade into rain and distance, and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite peace but was close enough. She had a job now. She had files to publish. She had 16 names to find. And she had a vampire king who was still earning her trust, but who had given her the one thing that mattered most, the chance to finish what Caroline started. The city lights blurred past the window, and Maya opened her phone, pulled up a blank document, and started typing. The names of the dead, the evidence of the conspiracy, the story that would matter in the human world, the story that would make treaty reform real instead of theoretical. She typed, and the rain fell, and the car carried her toward whatever came next, toward the first official meeting, toward the rest of her life as someone caught between worlds. And somewhere in the city, an unknown number waited for her response. 16 names ready to be revealed, the conspiracy deeper than she had known, the hunt just beginning. Maya looked at her reflection in the car window and saw someone harder than the waitress who had delivered wine 3 days ago, someone clearer, someone who understood the cost of truth but was willing to pay it anyway. She was not broken, she was not scared, she was ready. The story was not over, it was just starting.